Captain Marcus Chen had seen many worlds die, but none quite like Kepler 442b. The human colony of New Haven stretched across the planet's northern continent, its biodomes gleaming like scattered jewels against the rust-colored landscape. What made this world different wasn't its beauty or strategic importance, it was the fact that humanity had been completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy for 3 months. The Zephyrian Empire had blockaded the system with their massive warships, each one the size of a small moon. Their crystalline hulls pulsed with an eerie blue light that could be seen even from the planet's surface during the day. Queen Vexithara had made her intentions clear through her final transmission. Surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Colonial Administration building, watching families load their possessions into evacuation shuttles. Children cried as they were separated from pets that couldn't make the journey. Parents clutched photographs of relatives on other worlds they might never see again. The scene reminded him too much of Earth's final days during the Centauri Wars. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission from the Zephyrian flagship," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim, her voice tight with exhaustion. The young communications officer had been working double shifts since the blockade began, trying to establish contact with any human fleet that might come to their aid. Marcus turned away from the window and followed Kim to the communications center. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of Queen Vexithara. Her serpentine form towered nearly 12 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and black. 6 arms extended from her torso, each ending in clawed hands that could crush a human skull like an egg. Most unsettling were her eyes, pure silver orbs that seemed to pierce through the screen and look directly into Marcus's soul. "Human vessel, Commander." Vexthara's voice resonated through the speakers like grinding metal. "Your species continues to defy the natural order. For too long you have spread through the galaxy like a plague, consuming resources and corrupting other races with your primitive ideologies." Marcus stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "Your Majesty, the people of New Haven are civilians. They pose no threat to your empire. If you have grievances with humanity, take them up with our military forces, not innocent families." The alien queen's laugh was like breaking glass. "Innocent? Your kind knows nothing of innocence. You wage war on multiple fronts, enslave artificial intelligences, and destroy entire ecosystems for profit. But I am not without mercy, Captain Chen." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. How did she know his name? The Zephyrians had clearly been monitoring their communications far longer than anyone realized. "I offer you a choice," Vexithara continued, her silver eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. "Face my greatest creation in single combat. Should you somehow prevail, your people may evacuate safely to the outer rim. Should you fall, and you will, your colony will serve as an example to all humanity of what happens when you oppose the Zephyrian Empire." "And what exactly is this greatest creation you're referring to?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The queen's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Sirath is a creature born from the darkest corners of the galaxy, enhanced by Zephyrian bioengineering and psychic conditioning. It has destroyed 17 civilizations and consumed the life force of millions. Its hide can deflect energy weapons, its claws can slice through titanium alloy, and its mind is linked directly to mine. No creature in the known galaxy has ever defeated it in combat." Lieutenant Kim looked at Marcus with wide eyes, but he kept his expression neutral. "When and where?" "Tomorrow at dawn, in the Crimson Valley, 50 kilometers south of your primary settlement. Come alone, Captain, or watch your colony burn from orbit." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the communication center in heavy silence. Marcus stared at the blank screen for a long moment before turning to address his staff. "Begin immediate evacuation procedures for all non-essential personnel. I want every civilian off this planet within 48 hours. Captain, you can't seriously be considering this," protested Dr. Elena Vasquez, the colony's chief scientist. "Whatever this creature is, it's obviously been designed specifically to kill humans." "This is a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Marcus replied calmly. "But it's also the only chance these people have. If I don't show up, Vexithara will glass this entire planet from orbit. At least this way, some of them might survive." That night, Marcus sat alone in his quarters, cleaning his service pistol and checking his environmental suit's power cells. The weapon felt inadequate against a creature that could allegedly deflect energy beams, but it was all he had. He thought about writing letters to his sister on Mars and his elderly parents on Europa, but decided against it. If he survived, he could tell them himself. If he didn't, words on a screen wouldn't change anything. As the first rays of Kepler 442b's binary suns crested the horizon, Marcus made his way to the Crimson Valley. The landscape was aptly named. Iron oxide deposits in the soil gave everything a blood-red tint that seemed particularly ominous in the early morning light. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the valley floor like broken teeth, while twisted metallic trees swayed in the alien wind. Marcus activated his suit's environmental controls and checked his oxygen levels. 3 hours of breathable air, more than enough for whatever was about to happen. He positioned himself in the center of the valley and waited. The ground began to vibrate with a low rhythmic thumping. Something massive was approaching from the north, its footsteps echoing off the valley walls. Marcus drew his sidearm and tried to steady his breathing as the sound grew louder. When Zerath finally emerged from behind a massive boulder formation, Marcus understood why 17 civilizations had fallen before it. The creature stood nearly 20 feet tall at the shoulder, its body resembling a fusion of reptile and machine. Metallic spines ran along its back, crackling with bioelectric energy. Its hide was a deep black that seemed to absorb light, broken only by glowing purple veins that pulsed with each heartbeat. 6 legs supported its massive frame, each ending in claws the length of sword blades. But it was the creature's eyes that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. They were identical to Queen Vexthara's, pure silver orbs that radiated intelligence and malice. This wasn't just a beast. It was a living weapon with the mind of a predator and the technological enhancements of an advanced civilization. Zerath let out a roar that shattered several nearby rock formations and sent a flock of native birds fleeing in terror. Marcus raised his weapon, knowing it was probably useless but determined to face his death with dignity. As the creature began its charge across the valley floor, Marcus whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening and prepared to make his final stand. The ground shook violently as Zerath thundered across the Crimson Valley, its massive claws gouging deep furrows in the iron-rich soil. Marcus fired 3 shots in rapid succession, watching helplessly as the energy bolts simply dissipated against the creature's hide like water against stone. Vexthara hadn't been lying about its defenses. With nowhere to run in the open valley, Marcus dove behind a cluster of metallic trees just as Zerath's claws raked through the air where he'd been standing. The creature's momentum carried it past his hiding spot, buying him a few precious seconds to think. Traditional weapons were useless, but maybe there was another way. During his years serving in the Colonial Defense Force, Marcus had encountered dozens of alien species. One thing he'd learned was that intelligence often came with vulnerability. The more complex a creature's mind, the more ways it could be disrupted or confused. If Zerath was truly as intelligent as it appeared, perhaps it could be reasoned with. The creature spun around with surprising agility for something so massive, its silver eyes locking onto Marcus's position. Instead of raising his weapon again, Marcus slowly stepped out from behind the trees with his hands visible and empty. "I know you can understand me," Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the valley walls. "You're not just some mindless beast. There's intelligence behind those eyes, isn't there?" Zerath paused mid-charge, tilting its massive head as if considering his words. The bioelectric spines along its back flickered with different patterns of light, and Marcus could have sworn he saw something that wasn't pure predatory instinct in those silver orbs. "The Queen controls you through that psychic link," Marcus continued, taking a cautious step forward. "But what do you want? What did you want before she changed you?" A sound escaped from Zerath's throat, not quite a roar but something softer and more complex. The creature's stance shifted, becoming less aggressive and more curious. For a moment, the malice in its eyes seemed to flicker and fade. Then Zerath's spine went rigid, the purple veins in its hide pulsing brighter as Queen Vexthara's influence reasserted itself. The creature let out an anguished howl that was part rage and part pain, as if it were fighting an internal battle it couldn't win. "Fight her," Marcus urged, moving closer despite every survival instinct screaming at him to run. "Whatever you were before she twisted you into this, that part of you is still in there. I can see it." Zerath's massive head swung back and forth, the bioelectric spines along its back firing chaotically. Purple energy crackled around its claws as it struggled against invisible bonds. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. A creature created by the Zephyrians was actively resisting their control. Suddenly, Zerath collapsed to the ground, its breathing labored and its eyes rolling back. The psychic link with Queen Vexithara was causing visible physical trauma. Blood began to seep from the creature's nostrils, and the glowing veins in its hide flickered erratically. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. He holstered his weapon and approached the fallen creature, stopping just a few feet from its massive head. This close, he could see details that hadn't been visible before: surgical scars along Zerath's skull where cybernetic implants had been installed, and what looked like metal restraints fused directly to its bones. "They butchered you," Marcus whispered, reaching out slowly to touch one of the scars. "You weren't born this way. They made you into this." At his touch, Zerath's eyes snapped open and focused on Marcus with startling clarity. For just a moment, the silver glow faded, revealing natural amber eyes filled with pain and confusion. The creature's mouth opened, and instead of a roar, it produced a sound that was almost like speech, fragmented and distorted, but unmistakably attempting communication. "Help." The word was barely recognizable, filtered through alien vocal cords that had been surgically altered, but Marcus heard it clearly. Before Marcus could respond, Zerath's body convulsed violently as the Queen's control reasserted itself once again. The amber eyes disappeared, replaced by that cold silver glow, and the creature struggled to its feet with obvious effort. But something had changed. Instead of immediately attacking, Zerath stood perfectly still, as if locked in an internal struggle. The bioelectric spines along its back fired in rapid sequences, creating complex patterns that reminded Marcus of Morse code or some other form of communication. Marcus pulled out his datapad and began recording the light patterns, hoping his ship's computer could analyze them later. If Zerath was trying to communicate, this might be humanity's first glimpse into the mind of a Zephyrian bioweapon. The patterns suddenly stopped, and Zerath's head drooped as if exhausted. When it looked up again, there was something different in its expression, a kind of desperate pleading that transcended species barriers. "I don't know how to break their control over you," Marcus said softly, "but I promise you this: if there's a way to free you, I'll find it." Zerath's response was immediate and unexpected. The creature lowered its massive head until it was almost touching the ground in front of Marcus, in what any human would recognize as a gesture of submission or respect. Then it did something even more extraordinary. It extended one of its front legs, positioning its massive claw just inches from Marcus's chest, but making no aggressive move. Marcus looked at the extended claw and suddenly understood. It was an invitation. Zerath wanted him to climb onto its back. "You want me to ride you?" Marcus asked incredulously. "But the Queen, she'll see this as a defeat for both of us." Zerath made that almost speech sound again, and this time Marcus caught fragments of actual words. Together. Escape. Stars. The creature's meaning became clear. It wasn't just asking Marcus to ride it, it was proposing an escape. Somehow Zerath had retained enough of its original personality to want freedom, and it saw Marcus as the key to achieving it. Marcus looked up at the sky, where the Zephyrian fleet hung like predatory birds waiting to strike. Then he looked back at Zerath, seeing past the biomechanical enhancements to the imprisoned soul beneath. "All right," he said, grasping the extended claw and pulling himself up onto the creature's back. "Let's see where this takes us." As soon as Marcus settled between the bioelectric spines, Zerath rose to its full height and let out a roar that shook the entire valley. But this wasn't the sound of a mindless predator. It was a declaration of independence, a challenge to the Queen who had enslaved both their minds and their bodies. The creature's powerful legs coiled beneath them, and Marcus barely had time to grab onto the metallic spines before Zerath launched itself skyward with impossible force. They soared over the valley walls and across the crimson plains, heading not toward the human colony as expected, but toward the massive Zephyrian ships hanging in orbit. As the alien fleet grew larger in their vision, Marcus realized that his simple act of mercy toward a tortured creature had just changed the stakes of the entire conflict. They were no longer just trying to save New Haven. They were about to take the fight directly to Queen Vexithara herself. Xerath's powerful legs propelled them through the thin upper atmosphere of Kepler 442b. With each mighty leap, Marcus clung to the bioelectric spines, marveling at how the creature could somehow survive in the vacuum of space. As they rose higher, he noticed that Xerath's hide was secreting a thin, transparent membrane that formed a protective bubble around them both, providing breathable atmosphere and protection from cosmic radiation. The Zephyrian flagship grew larger before them, its crystalline hull pulsing with ominous energy. Marcus could see weapon ports opening along its surface as the ship's sensors detected their approach. But instead of firing, the massive vessel seemed to hesitate, as if uncertain how to respond to the unprecedented sight of their own bioweapon carrying a human directly toward them. Xerath's internal communication system crackled to life, and Queen Vexithara's voice filled the protective membrane around them. "Impossible," she hissed, her mental control struggling against Xerath's newfound resistance. "Return to the surface immediately. Destroy the human and complete your mission." Marcus felt Xerath's body tense beneath him as competing impulses warred within the creature's enhanced mind. The purple veins in its hide flared brighter, and its flight path wavered as the Queen's psychic commands battled against its growing independence. "You're stronger than her control," Marcus said, leaning forward to speak directly into what he hoped was Xerath's ear. "Whatever they did to you, whatever pain they've caused, you don't have to let it define you. You can choose your own path." Xerath's response was to angle their trajectory directly toward the flagship's main docking bay. The creature's bioelectric spines began firing in rapid sequences, and Marcus realized it was transmitting override codes. Somehow, Xerath retained access to Zephyrian ship systems from its time as their weapon. The massive bay doors began to iris open, and automated defense systems shut down one by one, as Xerath's codes convinced the ship's computer that this was an authorized return from a successful mission. Within moments, they were gliding through the enormous opening into the ship's cavernous interior. The docking bay was larger than most human cities, filled with countless smaller vessels and mechanical constructs that Marcus couldn't begin to identify. Xerath touched down on a platform designed specifically for creatures of its size, and Marcus immediately noticed dozens of similar platforms nearby, some occupied by creatures that made Xerath look small by comparison. "My God," Marcus whispered, staring at the menagerie of bioweapons surrounding them. "How many worlds have you conquered with these things?" Xerath's head turned toward a particularly large creature that appeared to be some kind of mechanical dragon, its scales replaced with living metal that shifted and flowed like liquid. The dragon's eyes opened as they approached, revealing the same silver glow that indicated Zephyrian control. But as Xerath moved closer, something unexpected happened. The dragon's eyes flickered, and for just a moment, Marcus saw the same amber glow he'd witnessed in Xerath's natural state. The dragon made a low, mournful sound, and Xerath responded with its own complex vocalizations. "They're communicating," Marcus realized. "You're not the only one fighting the conditioning, are you?" Xerath confirmed his suspicion by approaching several other bioweapons in the bay. Each one showed signs of the same internal struggle. Marcus had witnessed in Xerath brief moments of clarity, where their original personalities shone through the Zephyrian modifications. The implications were staggering. If all of these creatures were originally sentient beings who had been captured and converted into weapons, then the Zephyrian Empire's reign of terror across the galaxy had been built on systematic slavery and torture on an unimaginable scale. "Xerath, return to your chamber immediately." Queen Vexithara's voice echoed through the docking bay, but this time her mental control seemed weaker, as if the physical distance from her throne room was diminishing her power. Instead of obeying, Xerath began moving deeper into the ship, following corridors that seemed designed to accommodate creatures of enormous size. Marcus noted that the architecture was both beautiful and terrible, graceful curves and flowing lines that couldn't quite hide the fact that this was fundamentally a prison ship, designed to house enslaved beings. They encountered dozens of Zephyrian crew members along the way, but none dared to challenge Xerath directly. The creature was clearly recognized as one of the Queen's personal weapons, and its presence on the ship was not questioned. Marcus kept low against Xerath's back, hoping his environmental suit would be mistaken for some kind of equipment at a casual glance. Their destination became clear when they reached a massive circular chamber at the ship's heart. The throne room was a testament to Zephyrian power and cruelty. towering walls lined with the preserved remains of conquered species, and a ceiling that displayed real-time images of worlds burning under Zephyrian assault. Queen Vexithara sat on a throne carved from what appeared to be a single massive crystal, her 6 arms manipulating various control interfaces that managed her fleet and bioweapons simultaneously. She was even more intimidating in person than she had been on the view screen, her serpentine form radiating an aura of malevolent authority that made Marcus's skin crawl. "So," she said without turning around, "the human has somehow corrupted my greatest creation. How wonderfully predictable. Your species always believes it can befriend anything, no matter how dangerous or alien." Zerath moved to the center of the chamber but made no aggressive moves. Instead, the creature began producing the same complex light patterns Marcus had recorded in the valley, this time projecting them directly onto the throne room's walls through its bioelectric spines. Queen Vexithara finally turned to face them, and Marcus saw something in her silver eyes he hadn't expected: uncertainty, and perhaps even a touch of fear. "Impossible," she whispered, studying the light patterns. "Those are memories. You're accessing memories that should have been completely erased." Marcus watched the light show with growing amazement as he began to understand what Zerath was doing. The creature wasn't just resisting its conditioning, it was somehow recovering and displaying memories from before its capture and conversion. The patterns showed images of a peaceful world with crystalline cities and beings that looked like Zerath's original form, living in harmony with their environment. "You were a civilization," Marcus said, the pieces falling into place. "All of your bioweapons were once sentient species. You didn't create them. You enslaved them." Queen Vexithara's composure cracked, revealing the desperate paranoia beneath her imperial facade. "They are weapons now. Their previous existence is irrelevant. Order has been imposed where there was chaos." "No," Marcus replied, standing up on Zerath's back despite the danger. "You're not bringing order. You're spreading trauma and pain across the galaxy, turning victims into perpetrators in an endless cycle of violence." Zerath's light patterns intensified, and suddenly the images being projected weren't just memories. They were live feeds from other bioweapons throughout the fleet. One by one, creatures across dozens of ships were beginning to remember their origins, their original names, their lost families and homeworlds. The Queen's throne room erupted with alarms as her carefully maintained control began to crumble. Across her fleet, weapons that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were turning against their captors, driven by the simple reminder that they had once been something more than instruments of destruction. "What have you done?" Vexithara screamed, her 6 arms frantically working the controls as ship after ship reported rebellion among their bioweapon contingents. Marcus looked down at the alien queen with something approaching pity. "We reminded them who they used to be," he said simply. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Zerath let out a sound that Marcus had never heard before. Not a roar of rage or pain, but something that sounded almost like laughter. Around them, the great ship shuddered as other creatures broke free from their containment and began tearing through the vessel's corridors, no longer content to be prisoners in their own bodies. The Zephyrian Empire's greatest strength had just become its fatal weakness, and Marcus realized that he and Zerath had just triggered the largest slave rebellion in galactic history. The flagship shook violently as explosions echoed through its corridors. Queen Vexithara's carefully orchestrated control was collapsing faster than she could respond to the crisis. Through the throne room's massive viewport, Marcus could see other ships in the fleet experiencing similar chaos as their bioweapon contingents turned against their captors. "You don't understand what you've unleashed," Vexithara snarled, her silver eyes blazing with fury as she struggled to regain control of her fleet. "These creatures were primitives before we elevated them. Without our guidance, they'll destroy everything in their path, including your precious human colonies." Zerath's response was immediate and surprising. The creature's bioelectric spines began projecting new images. Not memories this time, but complex mathematical equations and star charts that demonstrated a level of scientific understanding that rivaled anything Marcus had seen from human scientists. They weren't primitives, Marcus realized. Studying the projections, some of these species were more advanced than humans when you captured them. You didn't elevate them. You lobotomized them and turned them into weapons. A new sound filled the throne room. The mechanical dragon from the docking bay had broken free and was approaching their position. But instead of the mindless rampage Vexithara had predicted, the dragon moved with careful precision. avoiding structural supports that might endanger other liberated creatures. Behind the dragon came more beings that Marcus could barely comprehend, a massive jellyfish-like entity that seemed to be made of living energy, a crystalline spider the size of a shuttlecraft, and dozens of other forms that defied easy classification. Each one showed signs of the same awakening consciousness that had freed Xerath from its mental prison. Xerath, the dragon spoke, its voice a harmonious blend of natural sound and mechanical precision. How long has it been since we heard our true names? I had forgotten that I was once called Skyweaver of the Third Dynasty. Xerath replied in its own complex vocalizations, and Marcus realized he was witnessing the first conversations these beings had been allowed to have in potentially centuries. They were remembering not just their individual identities, but their relationships with each other from before their enslavement. Queen Vexthara activated a personal shield generator and began backing toward a hidden exit. But her path was blocked by the arrival of more liberated bioweapons. "This changes nothing," she hissed. "Even if you remember your origins, you're still bound by the biological modifications we've made to your bodies. You cannot survive without our life support systems." The crystalline spider stepped forward, its multiple eyes focusing on the queen with disturbing intensity. "Incorrect assessment, Vexthara. We have been analyzing our modifications during our captivity. Many can be reversed or bypassed entirely." Marcus watched in fascination as the spider's body began to glow with internal light. Before their eyes, sections of its crystalline shell started to shift and reconfigure, removing obvious Zephyrian implants and revealing more organic-looking structures beneath. "Remarkable," Marcus breathed. "You're healing yourselves." "Not healing," Skyweaver corrected, its draconic form also beginning to show changes as metallic scales gave way to what appeared to be natural armor. "We are remembering. Our bodies recall their original forms, and consciousness can reshape even the most invasive modifications." Queen Vexthara's shield flickered as the ship's power systems began failing. Throughout the fleet, liberated bioweapons were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that had kept them enslaved. But they were doing so with surgical precision rather than destructive rage. "Why aren't they destroying everything?" Marcus asked, watching through the viewport as creatures on other ships carefully extracted Zephyrian crew members and deposited them in escape pods, rather than simply killing them. Xerath's response came in the form of shared images, visions, of the original civilizations these beings had come from. Marcus saw worlds where conflict was resolved through dialogue, where different species lived in harmony, and where violence was used only as a last resort to protect the innocent. They're better than their captors, Marcus realized. Even after everything that was done to them, they still remember how to show mercy. The realization seemed to break something in Queen Vexthara. Her imperial composure finally cracked completely, revealing the desperate fear underneath. "You think you've won? The Zephyrian Empire spans half the galaxy. Even if you destroy this fleet, there are thousands more waiting to take its place." Skyweaver's massive head turned toward the queen with what might have been pity. "Vexthara of the Second Brood, you speak of empire as if it were strength. But we have seen your homeworld through your own memories during our mental bondage. Your people are as enslaved as we were, bound by fear, tradition, and the weight of crimes committed in the name of order." The dragon's words hit their target. Vexthara's shield generator overloaded and shut down, leaving her exposed in the center of the throne room surrounded by creatures she had tortured for centuries. But instead of attacking, they simply waited, as if giving her the chance to respond. "What do you want from me?" the queen whispered, her voice barely audible above the sounds of systematic deconstruction happening throughout her ship. Xerath moved closer and lowered its massive head until it was at eye level with Vexthara. When it spoke, its voice was clearer than Marcus had ever heard it, the surgical modifications to its vocal cords apparently reversing themselves. "We want you to remember who you were before the Empire made you into this," Xerath said. "Your species once created beautiful things. Your earliest civilizations were built on cooperation and mutual aid. What happened to that, Vexthara?" For a moment, the silver glow in the queen's eyes flickered, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something else: confusion, loss, and perhaps even grief. But the moment passed quickly, and the imperial mask reasserted itself. "Sentiment is weakness," she replied, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Order must be maintained. Then you choose to remain a prisoner of your own making," the crystalline spider observed. "We offer freedom to all beings, including our former captors. But freedom must be chosen, not imposed. The liberated creatures began filing out of the throne room. Their business with Queen Vexithara apparently concluded. Marcus realized they were giving him the choice of what to do next. They would respect whatever decision he made regarding the alien queen. Marcus looked down at Vexithara, seeing past her monstrous appearance to the broken individual beneath. The offer stands, he said simply. You can choose to be something other than what the Empire made you. But the choice has to be yours. As Zerath carried him toward the exit, Marcus heard Vexithara call out behind them. Where will you go? Your human colony is still blockaded. Even without my fleet, you have nowhere to run. Zerath's response was to project one final image onto the throne room walls. A star chart showing not just human space, but the homeworlds of every species represented among the liberated bioweapons. Dozens of civilizations that had been thought extinct, their worlds marked as conquered territory on Zephyrian star maps. We're going home, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. All of us. We're going to reclaim the worlds that were stolen and rebuild what was destroyed. As they left Queen Vexithara alone in her crumbling throne room, Marcus realized that what had started as a simple challenge to save one human colony had become something far greater, the beginning of a galactic renaissance that would reshape the balance of power throughout the known universe. The journey back to Kepler 442b took on an entirely different character than their desperate flight to the Zephyrian flagship. Zerath glided through space with dozens of other liberated beings, their combined presence creating a magnificent procession that caught the attention of every sensor array in the system. Marcus watched through Zerath's protective membrane as the crystalline spider, who had revealed its original name as Threadkeeper, began weaving what appeared to be a massive web between several asteroids. But this wasn't for hunting or trapping. The delicate strands were actually communication filaments that allowed the formerly enslaved creatures to share memories and knowledge at light speed. They're building a network, Marcus realized, observing the complex patterns taking shape around them. A way for all the liberated species to stay connected across interstellar distances. Skyweaver soared alongside them, its body continuing to transform as more Zephyrian modifications fell away or were consciously overridden. The Empire sought to isolate us from our own thoughts, the dragon explained to Marcus through Zerath's translation. But consciousness shared becomes consciousness multiplied. Together, we are far more than the sum of our individual strengths. As they approached New Haven, Marcus could see the human colonists gathering at observation points to witness the unprecedented sight. Children pressed their faces against biodome windows, pointing at creatures that had existed only in their worst nightmares just hours before. But there was no fear in their expressions. Something about the way the liberated beings moved together spoke of intelligence, purpose, and benevolent intent. Lieutenant Kim's voice crackled through Marcus's suit radio. Captain, we're receiving transmission requests from over 40 different species. They're asking for permission to establish temporary settlements in uninhabited areas of the planet while they, and I quote, remember how to be themselves again. Marcus looked down at the colony sprawling beneath them, then at the diverse collection of beings that had chosen to follow him and Zerath back to this small human outpost. Grant all requests, Lieutenant, and start working with their representatives to establish proper communication protocols. We're about to become the first truly multi-species colony in human space. Zerath touched down in the same Crimson Valley where their confrontation had begun, but the landscape looked different now. Where there had been barren iron oxide soil, small green shoots were beginning to emerge. The crystalline spider's web had somehow catalyzed dormant seeds in the planet's ecosystem, awakening life that had been sleeping for geological ages. How is this possible? Dr. Vasquez asked, arriving with a team of xenobiologists to study the phenomenon. According to our surveys, this planet couldn't support complex plant life without extensive terraforming. Threadkeeper scuttled over to the group of humans, moving with delicate precision to avoid damaging the emerging vegetation. Through Zerath's translation, the spider's voice carried a note of gentle amusement. Your surveys were correct for the current atmospheric conditions, but this world once hosted a thriving ecosystem before the Zephyrians strip-mined its core elements. The seeds have been waiting in stasis for the proper catalyst. Dr. Vasquez knelt to examine one of the sprouting plants, her scanner beeping rapidly as it detected chemical compounds that shouldn't exist in nature. These readings are incredible. The plant matter contains trace elements of crystalline lattice structures identical to your web material. You're not just growing plants, you're growing a living communication network. All life seeks connection, Threadkeeper explained. What your species calls terraforming, we understand as remembering. This world wants to live again. We simply reminded it how. Over the following days, the transformation of Kepler 442b accelerated beyond anything the human colonists had thought possible. Skyweaver used its considerable engineering knowledge to help design atmospheric processors that worked in harmony with the planet's natural systems, rather than overwhelming them. The energy being that called itself Lightkeeper established orbital solar collection, arrays that powered the entire operation without disturbing local weather patterns. Marcus found himself serving as an unofficial ambassador between humanity and the growing coalition of liberated species. Each day brought new arrivals, creatures, who had heard the call across Threadkeeper's communication web and made the journey to this small world that was becoming a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. Reports began filtering in from human military command about increased Zephyrian activity along the borders of human space. The loss of an entire bioweapon fleet had not gone unnoticed, and the Empire was mobilizing its remaining forces for what appeared to be a massive retaliation. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Harrison," Lieutenant Kim reported during one of their daily briefings. "The Zephyrians have issued an ultimatum to the Terran Federation. They're demanding that we surrender all liberated bioweapons immediately, or they'll begin systematic bombardment of human colonies starting with our core worlds." Marcus looked out the window at a group of human children playing alongside young creatures that were apparently the offspring of some of the liberated beings. They had adapted to each other's presence with the easy acceptance that only children seemed capable of, creating games that accommodated different physical capabilities and communication methods. "What's Admiral Harrison's recommendation?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. "He wants us to seriously consider compliance," Kim replied reluctantly. "The military assessment is that we can't win a full-scale war against the Zephyrian Empire, especially not while protecting dozens of non-combat refugee species." Zirath's head appeared in the window, and Marcus could see the intelligence in those amber eyes that were now permanently free of silver control. The creature had been listening to their conversation, and its expression conveyed a complex mix of understanding and sadness. "They want us to choose between protecting humanity and protecting everyone else," Marcus said to his companion. "The same choice Vexithara probably faced when her people first started down the path of empire." Through the growing communication network, Marcus could sense the reactions of the liberated beings across the planet. There was no anger or accusation in their response to the human military's position, only a deep understanding of the impossible choices that species faced when confronted with overwhelming force. Skyweaver landed near the administration building and requested a meeting with the colonial leadership. When the group assembled, the dragon's first words surprised everyone present. "We have discussed the situation among ourselves," Skyweaver announced, "and we have reached a consensus. We will not allow humanity to sacrifice itself for our freedom. If necessary, we will leave this system and find another refuge." "No," Marcus said immediately. "That's exactly what the Zephyrians want, to divide us and force us back into isolation. The moment we abandon each other, we become exactly what they've always claimed we are." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. What if there was a third option? What if instead of preparing for war or surrender, we made it impossible for the Zephyrians to continue their current course of action? All eyes turned to the scientist who had been spending most of her time studying the rapid ecosystem development happening across the planet. She activated a holographic display showing the planet-wide network that Threadkeeper and the other beings had constructed. "Look at what we've accomplished here in just a few days," she continued. "A dead world is becoming a garden. Species that had never met before are collaborating on projects that benefit everyone. The liberated beings aren't just remembering their individual identities. They're creating something entirely new." Marcus began to see where she was heading. "You think we can offer the galaxy an alternative to the Zephyrian model?" "More than that," Dr. Vasquez replied. "I think we already are offering that alternative. Every day more ships arrive from species that have heard about what's happening here. Some are refugees from Zephyrian oppression. but others are simply curious about a place where different civilizations are working together as equals. Zerath's bioelectric spines began glowing with complex patterns, and Marcus realized the creature was communicating with beings across the network. After several minutes, Zerath turned back to the human group, with what could only be described as excitement in its expression. "The network has reached beyond this system," Marcus translated, understanding Zerath's meaning intuitively. "Other liberated bioweapons have begun establishing similar colonies. The Zephyrians aren't just facing a rebellion, they're watching their entire model of galactic order being replaced with something better." "Lieutenant." Kim's communication board lit up with incoming transmissions from across known space. "Captain, we're receiving requests for alliance from over 200 different species. They're asking if they can send delegations to learn about our, and I quote, new way of building civilization." Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the thriving landscape that had been barren desert just days before. In the distance, he could see humans and aliens working together on construction projects, their different capabilities combining to create. 3 months after the liberation of Zerath, the Zephyrian response finally came, not in the form of the massive military assault everyone had expected, but as a single ship requesting permission to land on New Haven. The vessel's design was unmistakably Zephyrian, but its approach was cautious rather than aggressive, and it transmitted surrender codes rather than demands. Marcus stood in the same Crimson Valley where everything had begun, watching the alien ship settle onto the transformed landscape. What had once been barren soil was now a meadow of crystalline flowers that chimed softly in the wind, their roots connected to Threadkeeper's planet-wide communication network. The ship's boarding ramp extended, and a figure emerged that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. Queen Vexithara walked slowly down the ramp, but she looked nothing like the imposing tyrant he had confronted months earlier. Her serpentine form appeared smaller somehow. Her scales had lost their lustrous sheen, and most striking of all, her eyes were no longer the cold silver of imperial authority. They were a warm golden color that spoke of painful self-awareness. Zerath moved protectively in front of Marcus, but made no aggressive gestures. The creature's amber eyes studied its former captor with what appeared to be a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "I come seeking asylum," Vexithara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The grinding metallic quality that had once made her speech so intimidating was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost fragile. "My own empire has declared me a traitor and sentenced me to neural reconditioning for losing control of the bioweapon fleets." Marcus studied the fallen queen, looking for signs of deception or hidden weapons. But all he saw was a being who appeared to be carrying an enormous weight of guilt and exhaustion. "What happened to the rest of your fleet? Our long-range sensors show massive Zephyrian movements, but they seem to be concentrated around your core worlds rather than moving toward human space." A sound escaped from Vexthara that might have been bitter laughter. "The liberation you triggered here spread faster than we could contain it. Over 60% of our bioweapon arsenal has either escaped or turned against us. Several colony worlds have declared independence, and 3 of our major military commanders have defected with their entire fleets." Skyweaver landed nearby, the dragon's massive form casting a long shadow across the meadow. "The network tells us that your homeworld burns with civil war," the dragon observed without malice. "Those who still support the old ways fight against those who would choose a different path. And in the middle are countless beings who simply want the violence to end." Vexithara's golden eyes fixed on Skyweaver with obvious recognition. "You were among the first we captured, weren't you? From the crystal cities of Drakmor Prime. I remember your world's beauty before I ordered its destruction. Drakmor Prime still exists," Skyweaver replied calmly. "Your forces destroyed the cities, but the people survived. They have spent generations rebuilding in hidden places, waiting for the day they could reclaim their world. That day has come." The former queen's composure finally cracked and she collapsed to her knees in the crystalline meadow.
"How many worlds?"
"How many civilizations did we destroy in the name of order? The memories are coming back, not just my own, but fragments of consciousness from every bioweapon I ever controlled. I can feel their pain, their loss, their families." Marcus found himself feeling something he hadn't expected, pity for the creature who had once threatened to destroy his entire colony. The network does that, he explained. It doesn't just connect minds, it connects hearts. When you're truly linked to other beings, their suffering becomes your suffering. Threadkeeper approached through the meadow, moving with the careful grace that characterized all its actions. Vexithara of the Second Brood, we have been monitoring the communications from your homeworld. Your people face a choice. Continue the cycle of violence that has defined your empire or learn to build something new. But that choice cannot be forced upon them any more than freedom could be forced upon us. What are you saying? Vexithara asked, looking up at the crystalline spider with confusion in her golden eyes. We are offering to help, Zerath answered, speaking for the first time since the Queen's arrival. Not to conquer or control, but to heal. The communication network that connects this world can be extended to yours. Your people can experience what cooperation feels like instead of domination. The proposition was so unexpected that Marcus had to sit down on a nearby boulder to process it. You want to save the Zephyrian Empire by teaching them how to not be an empire? We want to save the Zephyrian people by teaching them how to be themselves again, Skyweaver corrected. Every species that has joined our network has remembered something they had lost. Not just individual identity, but the capacity for joy, creativity, and peaceful coexistence. The Zephyrians have forgotten these things, but forgetting is not the same as losing. Dr. Vasquez emerged from her mobile laboratory, her scanner in hand and her expression showing the excitement of someone who had just made a significant discovery. Captain, I've been analyzing the quantum resonance patterns in the Queen's neural pathways. The silver implants that maintained her connection to the bioweapons are still active, but they're broadcasting on a completely different frequency now. What does that mean? Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would be significant. It means she's still connected to every Zephyrian bioweapon in the galaxy, Dr. Vasquez explained. But instead of sending commands, she's receiving their memories and emotions. Every moment of pain, every lost family, every destroyed homeworld, she's experiencing all of it simultaneously. Marcus looked at Vexithara with new understanding. That's why you came here. You're not seeking asylum from your people. You're seeking help with the guilt that's threatening to drive you insane. The former queen nodded slowly, tears streaming down her scaled cheeks. I can't make it stop. Every time I close my eyes, I see the faces of beings I ordered killed. I hear the voices of children crying for parents who were turned into weapons. How do you bear it? How do any of you bear knowing what was done to you? Zerath moved closer to its former captor, lowering its massive head until it was at eye level with the kneeling queen. We bear it by choosing to build instead of destroy, the creature said gently. Pain shared becomes pain diminished. Hope shared becomes hope multiplied. Marcus watched this interaction with amazement. Months ago, these two beings had been locked in a relationship of absolute domination and control. Now they were sitting in a field of crystal flowers, one offering comfort to the other in their mutual healing. The network can help, Threadkeeper offered, but the choice to connect must be freely made. We will not force healing upon you any more than we would force destruction. Vexithara looked around the meadow, taking in the sight of humans and liberated aliens working together on various projects in the distance. Children, both human and alien, played games that would have been impossible before the liberation. Their laughter carried on the wind like music. If I join your network, she asked quietly, will I still be me? Or will I become some idealized version of what you think I should be? You will become who you choose to be, Marcus answered. The network doesn't change people. It just gives them the support and perspective they need to change themselves. The fallen queen closed her golden eyes and extended one of her 6 hands toward Zerath. When the creature gently touched its claw to her palm, Marcus could see the moment of connection through the soft glow that spread from the contact point across both beings. For several minutes, neither Vexithara nor Zerath moved. Then the queen's eyes opened and Marcus saw something in them that hadn't been there before, peace and perhaps even the beginning of hope. I can feel them, she whispered.
All the beings across the galaxy who are choosing healing over hatred.
It's like finding family I never knew I had. As the sun set over New Haven once again, the aurora created by the communication network was joined by new patterns, signals from distant worlds where former enemies were learning to become allies, where cycles of violence were being broken by simple acts of understanding and forgiveness. The Zephyrian Empire was ending not with a bang but with a choice. The choice to become something better than what they had been before. 5 years after the first liberation on Kepler 442b, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the starship Unity, watching as they approached what had once been the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. The vessel beneath his feet was unlike any ship that had ever sailed between the stars, a collaborative design that incorporated technology and artistic sensibilities from over 300 different species. Xerath lay on a specially designed platform nearby, its form now completely free of Zephyrian modifications. The creature had grown larger over the years, but also more graceful, its natural amber hide marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift with its emotional state. Currently, those patterns showed a mixture of anticipation and peaceful contentment. Long-range sensors are picking up the Zephyrian homeworld, reported Commander Sarah Kim, who had chosen to join the expedition despite being offered command of her own vessel in the Terran fleet. The transformation is even more extensive than the report suggested. Through the viewports, Marcus could see a world that bore little resemblance to the military fortress it had been during the Empire's height. Where once there had been massive weapons platforms and industrial complexes dedicated to bioweapon production, now there were sprawling cities that seemed to grow from the landscape itself, rather than dominating it. The most striking change was, visible from orbit, the entire planet was connected by a web of crystalline filaments similar to Threadkeeper's network. But on a massive scale, the web pulsed with gentle light that created aurora effects in the planet's atmosphere, and Marcus knew that each pulse represented communication between beings who were learning to understand each other, across species barriers. Incoming transmission from the Planetary Council, Kim announced. It's interesting. The council appears to be composed of representatives from over 50 different species, including several former bioweapons who chose to remain on the homeworld to help with the reconstruction. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a chamber that was clearly designed to accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and environmental needs. At the center sat a figure that Marcus recognized despite the dramatic changes, former Queen Vexithera, though she no longer bore any title of nobility. Her serpentine form had regained its natural coloration, and her golden eyes held a warmth that would have been impossible during her imperial days. "Marcus Chen," she said, her voice carrying genuine joy, "welcome to what we now call Hope's Crossing, though I suppose to you, it will always be the world where the greatest empire in galactic history learned how to become something better." Marcus smiled at the transformation in his former enemy. Over the years, through the communication network, he had watched Vexithara struggle with her guilt and gradually learned to channel it into constructive action. She had become one of the most effective advocates for peaceful cooperation in the galaxy, using her intimate knowledge of imperial tactics to help other species resist oppression. "The reports from your world have been remarkable," Marcus replied. "We've been following the progress of the ecological restoration projects and the integration programs. I understand you've successfully reintroduced over 60 extinct species to their original homeworlds? 73, actually," corrected a new voice as Skyweaver's draconic form moved into the camera's view. The great dragon had established a permanent presence on the former Imperial world, serving as a bridge between the various species working on reconstruction efforts. And we've made contact with refugee populations from 12 civilizations that the Empire believed to be completely extinct. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward from her position at the science station. "Our xenobiological team is particularly interested in the symbiotic cities you've developed. The preliminary reports suggest you found a way to integrate technological infrastructure with living ecosystems in ways that benefit both. Come see for yourself," Vexthera invited. "The landing coordinates are being transmitted now. Though I should warn you, the welcome committee is quite large. Word of your arrival has spread throughout the network, and many beings want to meet the humans who first showed us that cooperation was possible." As the Unity descended through the planet's atmosphere, Marcus marveled at the landscape passing beneath them. The cities were indeed living things, organic structures that seemed to breathe and grow, with transportation networks that resembled blood vessels more than roads. But there was nothing chaotic or uncontrolled about the design. Everything showed clear evidence of planning and cooperation between multiple intelligence types. Xerath lifted its head to look out the viewport, and Marcus saw patterns of excitement dancing across its hide. "You're happy to be back," Marcus observed, placing a hand on his companion's flank. Even after everything that happened here. This is where healing began, Zerath replied, its voice now completely clear and free of any artificial distortion. Pain transformed into purpose. Slavery became liberation. It is fitting that we witness the completion of that transformation. The landing platform they approached was a marvel of bioengineering, a living structure that extended pseudopods to gently grasp their ship and guide it to a perfect landing. Around the platform, Marcus could see hundreds of beings representing dozens of species, all waiting to greet the visitors who had played such a crucial role in their liberation. As they disembarked, Marcus was immediately struck by the quality of the air. It was rich with the sense of growing things and carried subtle harmonics that seemed to promote feelings of well-being and connection. The communication network's influence was clearly present, but it felt nothing like the oppressive mental control that had once characterized this world. Vexthara approached them with a grace that belied her massive size, moving through the crowd with easy familiarity. Behind her came beings that Marcus recognized from the liberation: Threadkeeper, several former bioweapons who had reclaimed their original names, and many others who had become friends over the years through the network. "Before we begin the formal ceremonies," Vexthara said, "there is something I want to show you, a project that has been years in the making, and which represents everything we've learned about the difference between conquest and cooperation." She led them to a transportation pod that resembled a large seed, its interior configured to comfortably accommodate both human and alien physiologies. As they traveled through the city, Marcus saw countless examples of successful interspecies collaboration. Buildings that incorporated architectural principles from dozens of different worlds, gardens where plants from across the galaxy grew in carefully balanced ecosystems, and workshops where beings with vastly different capabilities worked together on projects that no single species could have completed alone. Their destination was a massive structure, at the city's heart, a crystalline tower that rose nearly a kilometer into the sky, its faceted surface reflecting and amplifying the network's communication patterns. But as they approached, Marcus realized this wasn't just a building. It was a monument. "We call it the Memorial of Lost Voices," Vexthara explained as they entered the tower's base. "Every face you see here represents a being who died because of Imperial policy. Soldiers, civilians, entire species that were driven to extinction. But more importantly, it serves as a promise that their sacrifice was not meaningless." The interior of the tower was breathtaking. Holographic displays showed the faces and brief biographies of millions of beings who had perished during the Empire's reign. But these weren't displays of guilt or shame. They were celebrations of lives lived and remembered. Interactive exhibits allowed visitors to experience fragments of memories from the deceased, shared through the network by survivors who had known them. "This is how we ensure that history doesn't repeat itself," Skyweaver explained, its voice carrying deep reverence, "by making the cost of violence real and personal to every generation that follows." At the tower's apex, they found something that took Marcus's breath away: a living garden suspended in a sphere of breathable atmosphere, where plants and creatures from every world that had been touched by the Empire grew together in harmony. At the garden's center was a simple plaque that read, "In memory of all who were lost, in hope of all who are yet to be born. Every child born in the new Confederation spends time here," Vexthara said softly, "not to be traumatized by our past mistakes, but to understand the preciousness of the peace they inherit." As they stood in the memorial garden, Marcus felt the communication network's gentle presence at the edge of his consciousness. Not intrusive or controlling, but simply offering connection, understanding, and the shared wisdom of billions of beings who had chosen cooperation over conflict. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "The network spans half the galaxy. The former empire has been transformed into a cooperative confederation, and species that were enemies for millennia are working together. Where do we go from here?" Zerath moved to the garden's edge, where a viewing port offered a panoramic view of the transformed world below. "We go to the stars," the creature said simply. "There are still worlds that suffer under oppression, still species that believe might makes right, still beings who have forgotten how to hope. We carry the network to them, not as conquerors but as friends offering a better way."